What is going on, guys? I hope you all had a great Christmas and are still enjoying the holidays. I'm back today with Vol.6 of the Sound Like series covering Knxwledge. Now, before I even play the record, I want to say that this episode is going to lean way more towards creativity than to any technical mixing approaches, as I think the format is way more important, especially with Knxwledge's sound. This is the composition I'm going to be taking you through today. So right off the bat, I'd like to apologise for my voice in this one. I'm actually slightly ill, which is super rare for me. It's actually the first time in maybe 5 or 6 years. But anyway, the first thing I want to spend a couple of minutes on is just talking about Knxwledge's production style, gear, and software that he uses, as well as any golden nuggets that I've also come across online. His drums across pretty much all of his records feel pretty relaxed. Now, generally speaking, bringing a note forward or having it play in front of the beat sounds tense and a little edgy, while playing a note behind the beat, pushing it back slightly, gives you a lazier or more relaxed sound. Obviously, Knxwledge's drums fall in the latter category. I remember seeing a video of him on Vine playing some drums in over one of his tracks live on the MPC 2000 XL. I've also seen him using the Ableton Push in various live environments too, so it's probably fair to speculate that he plays in at least some of his drums in live via one of these devices. In an interview, he spoke on his love for Ableton, being able to easily transition his productions into a live performance world, with having the two different screens in live. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Ableton Live essentially has one screen for live performance, the clip view, and one for arrangement. The clip view is also a great tool for production, however, especially for recording lots of little snippets of ideas. Knxwledge went on to say in the same interview that he does just that, giving him, and I quote, unlimited ideas in one session. A lot of his tracks off his 2013 album are split into two parts, changing halfway through into an entirely new composition. I like this approach, as some ideas are only meant to be 1 or 2 minutes long. Something I learned from Flying Lotus: stop trying to make every idea 3 or 4 minutes long. Leave them at 1 minute or whatever they sound good at. Sometimes the best albums or pieces of music are just a bunch of 1 minute ideas that really show you who the artist is. Now, that's a much better approach than having a bunch of 4-minute tracks that get boring after a couple of minutes, which seems to be the preferred method. People can always listen to it again, you don't need to drag a song out. I find it strange that, as humans, we've accepted a 16-bar loop repeated say 8 times as a track, especially in hip hop, or a minute of music repeated 4 times as a 4-minute composition when it's really just a 60-second piece. Arguably the best producer of all time, J Dilla, with one of the best albums ever, Donuts, did exactly this. If you disagree with this statement, that's fine, everyone is welcome to their own opinion. But just bear in mind that 29 of the 31 tracks Dilla made for Donuts were while he lay in a hospital bed on a Roland SP303. Now, this was around the summer of 2005. Donuts was released on the day of his 32nd birthday and 3 days before his death on February 10th. Because of this, the album contains some very real emotions, hidden meanings and messages, and most likely way more that I'm still yet to discover. Most of the artists I cover on this series has been inspired and influenced from J Dilla in one way or another, so I felt it only necessary to share some of his story and work. Most of the tracks on Knxwledge's Cauliflower album are around 2 minutes in length, and as I already mentioned, change into a second track around halfway through. His newest project has tracks length even under 50 seconds. Using this method doesn't create short bodies of work either, as you can simply just include more ideas. I think albums should have a theme, something that ties all the tracks together and makes it feel like a cohesive project. Just ask yourself, would you rather have 10 repetitive songs, each 4 minutes long, that get boring after 2, or 31 innovative ideas that all fit together to create a truly inspiring body of work that shows off your colours as an artist? Knxwledge's albums, like Dilla's, are a canvas in where he shares a musical collection of ideas that seamlessly fit together as one piece. Now, I'm referring to J Dilla a lot, as if you're a fan of Knxwledge, you're going to be a fan of Dilla. His influence is still felt in music today, and I feel going to the roots of the influence is critical in any creative endeavour. Now that I've set the tone for this tutorial, let's get into the composition. Starting with the drums feels right. Here's what the drums sound like on their own. A lot of Knxwledge's drum grooves sound like he's chopped up live breaks and then sequenced them in his signature creative way. I mentioned that he uses an MPC 2000 XL. This is most likely where the drum samples will come from. He may also have samples from, or use, samplers such as the Roland SP 1200. Even if he doesn't, these samples will give you something pretty close to his sound. Now, a lot of his style comes from lo-fi processing and tape emulation on the mastering chain, which I'll get into towards the end of this video. There isn't a ton of high-end from hats or ride cymbals. The drums sound dark with the top end rolled off, exactly like you get from tape. I did actually read online that he records everything to a cassette, then back into Ableton, giving you the analog warmth sound that everyone seems to be after these days. I appreciate recording to tape can be an inconvenience, and many of us simply don't have the facilities to do so. I found this plugin through Tocky Monster, who posted a Snapchat of her using it only a few days ago actually. It's named Crap Cassette and is a free plugin for Ableton that runs through Max for Life. You can see it at the bottom down here. The author of this plugin is SES Devices, who say this about the plugin. Emulating the sound of a good old C90 playing back on a less than perfect deck, Crap Cassette attempts to take you on a nostalgic Aladdin trip back to the golden age of compact cassette, maybe leaving you with a tear in your eye. The only thing missing is the pencil needed to wind the tape back when your deck turned your favourite album into a pile of brown plastic spaghetti. I'll link this up in the description below. Now, the one difference you may notice when using these emulation plugins is that the transients on the drum hits won't be as hard. Now, tape tends to reduce the dynamic of signal transients through thermal or magnetic saturation compression effects. Also worth noting is that loud high frequency transients simply don't survive magnetic tape recording. There's no need to go mad with high-end detail if you're going for a tape sound, as it's mostly going to be lost. So here's the drums before the Crap Cassette plugin. And after. All these samples are from my Knxwledge sample pack, the link to which will be in the description below. There should also be a card popping up on the screen which will take you to where you can download it. Now, I said only a couple of minutes ago that the key to emulating Knxwledge's sound is through tape processing. The controls on this Crap Cassette plugin are exactly the same as most of the tape emulation plugins out there, so I just want to spend a couple of minutes explaining some of the most important ones. So we'll start with wow here. Wow is a low frequency speed variation effect, which is very common on vinyl records if the center hole is punched slightly off center, or if the disc is badly warped. Now, flutter, which you can see just next to it here, flutter is a much faster frequency version of the same thing, typically caused by a worn tape machine capstan or a lumpy pinch roller. Have a play with them both so you get a feel for how they sound when applied to your own record. Now, the dropout section on the end here can create some interesting effects. A dropout is a brief loss or sudden decrease of signal level, most often caused by a defect in the oxide. Dropouts can also be caused by damage to the tape itself, a temporary clogging of the record head during recording, or likewise a clogging of the playhead during playback. The misalign control down here affects how essentially clear or muffled the sound is. The noise and distortion section of this is obviously self-explanatory. The hum and width allows you to choose from two tones, one at 50Hz and one at 60Hz. You can control the volume of the tones, as well as the stereo width of the sound. Now, keeping it at 0 keeps it in mono. I've got all my drum hits in this kind of drum rack on steroids device I've made. So if you look over here, I've got 5 different macros, each for a different style of drum hit. You can put 128 samples in each one, and it allows you to switch through them all with ease. So I'll just demonstrate that for you now. So you can hear as I'm changing that macro parameter, it's switching to a different kick drum sample. And as I said, you can have 128 sounds in each one, so 128 kicks, 128 snares, etc. This is also super useful when you've made a pattern, like I have, but you decide you want a different drum sample. You can quickly switch out an old one for a new one. Now, I've also added some additional parameters in this, which you can see down here, for pitch, decay, and velocity. This device is provided free with a sample pack, with all the sounds all preloaded and set up, so make sure you check that out. So the first thing I sequenced was this simple beat on the push. If you're wondering why the kick sounds kind of weird every few bars, it's because of this Effectrix. It's just stretching out a couple of the kicks every so often, giving it that glitchy effect that Knxwledge seems to be a fan of. I've then got this percussion group. It consists of a couple of different drum breaks as well as a hi-hat pattern. I mentioned towards the start of the video that Knxwledge uses loads of live drum breaks to really thicken out his drum groove. The breaks are all chopped and sequenced again on the push. Now I keep mentioning that as it makes it so much more creative using some kind of controller. I can't tell you how many tracks and dope loops I've created from happy accidents using the push. The percussion again has that stretched effect on it from Effectrix and is also being sidechained to the kick and snare. This also means that the kick and snare from the live breaks will dip out of the way and not interfere with my main drums. Now this is super important. So altogether the drums sound like this again. Now I like to play the drums all together and then play them at the end when I've explained all the different elements in there, because listening to them again you can usually pick out each separate element, and that usually helps you to build your own drum grooves a lot more effectively and efficiently. So I think we've spent enough time on the drums, let's get into the music. In some of his records there is talking in the background, like the ambience of a cafe or lounge bar. Now the track I'm referring to is TRSH, and it reminds me of live music in some kind of jazz bar late in the evening. Now he's using these sounds to create a particular atmosphere in his music that really doesn't have any effect on the actual musical elements in the track, or maybe he's using them to invoke an emotion in the listener or to create a bigger listening experience, who knows. Other than the sample, I haven't got any musical elements in this track, but I have got something I'd like to show you, and it's this, Schwarzenator. I think that's how you pronounce it anyway. It's another free plugin for Ableton, which again I'll link up in the description. Now it basically allows you to generate different types of chords from one note. So for anyone who doesn't have a strong knowledge of theory, this will be a huge help. I've got one of the key presets open here in Silence. You can see here, the Onyx one. This is then generating a simple triad chord, with my root being A sharp, the key of this track. So this is what it sounds like. A kind of plain sound, not really much use for that in this style of music, but when I put Ableton's arpeggiator plugin on it, this is how it sounds. Suddenly it becomes something a lot more interesting that could perhaps be pitched down and used in a creative way. And remember, this was all from one A sharp note. I'm just showing that you really don't need any musical theory training to create some really dope music if you know how to use the tools at your disposal. Although there is no true substitute for learning theory, some of these tools may help you get there faster and cut down the learning curve. So moving on to the sample. I get a kind of soul, R&B and funk vibe from Knxwledge's melodies and harmonies. He seems to use a lot of slow jammy type of tracks, but not necessarily old records. He uses tons of samples throughout his records, but even if you don't like sampling, it can still inspire some really creative music. This is how the sample sounds soloed. My process, which I'm sure is similar to Knxwledge and most sample-based producers, is to warp the track in Ableton, making sure that it's in time with whatever tempo I'm working at. I'll then drop it into an instance of Simpler, switch it to slice mode in quarter notes. I'll then get chopping and playing on push till something interesting happens. Now, it can be good practice to just leave Ableton recording while you play around in case something cool happens and then you can't recreate it. In fact, I find just jamming for a few hours yields the best results. It sounds kind of backwards, but when you're trying to come up with something, most likely nothing ever happens. Great ideas come when you aren't trying to think of them. I've got an EQ which is rolling off everything under 100Hz, which is standard practice when these frequencies aren't necessary, taking a little bit out around 500Hz, which always seems to just contain muddy frequencies that also aren't needed, and then boosting or increasing the amplitude of the frequencies around 12 kHz. Now in this instance it wasn't needed, as I'm cutting off everything above around 10 kHz on the master to give it that kind of tape sound, but usually boosting around 12k adds a little sparkle to the sample which can be desired. So these two compressors you can see here are then just sidechaining the sample to each the kick and the snare. Now Knxwledge uses sidechaining a ton across his tracks. In some it is more emphasised than in others, but it's nearly always present. Moving on to the bass. So the bass in this track is coming from Serum. If you don't have Serum, I'd recommend some kind of Moog simulator which will give you a similar sound to Knxwledge, paired with a melody that has a kind of blues feel to it. In Serum though, it's literally just the initialized preset with oscillator A turned off and the sub oscillator turned on and pitched down 2 octaves. I then had a little play with the envelope down here just to get the sound how I wanted it. So this is how it sounds on its own. We've got the typical EQ and compression configuration for all my regular watchers. I've also got the trusty max bass, which I absolutely swear by. I've also got the Camel Crusher on here, like in my Mirror Master tutorial, set to the British Clean preset, with everything else turned down to 0, besides the volume and the mix. It's then being sidechained to the kick drum down here with this compressor, just to give the kick its own space in the mix. The melody was just an idea that I've played in. That's a mix of something close to the original, and a little bit of improvisation for the bits that needed it. So moving on to the mastering chain. I've been repeating myself with the mastering chain as it's very similar in every video. However, I'll just go over the differences in this composition. So the crap cassette plugin I showed you earlier is on the master bus, so it's applying effects to the whole record. I'll just before and after it so you can hear what it's doing. So this is it without. And then with. You can hear what it's adding. If I were to change the control here, the age of the tape, it applies almost a bandpass effect to it, in where you lose both the highs and lows of the record. I've got it set to almost off, as I want to keep the lows where they are, and control how much of the highs are being rolled off manually. So that's what I've done here with this EQ. I've rolled off everything above 10 kHz with an 18 dB slope, so it's nice and gradual. This was done purely to emulate the tape, as I personally like up to around 14 kHz on the master. This one here is then cutting everything under 100Hz off the sides of the record, leaving the middle of the record alone. Now to further replicate Knxwledge's tape emulation sound, I've got a J37 tape saturation plugin from Waves. It's a plugin replication of the J37 tape machine at Abbey Road Studios. I actually prefer Slate's virtual tape machine plugin, but I'm still waiting on my RLAC2 dongle. Actually, little side note, Slate Digital makes a ton of dope plugins, and they offer a deal in where you can get all the plugins in the collection plus every new plugin they release for $15 a month. Also, you can get Serum for $10 a month from Splice. I'm not sponsored or have any affiliation to either Slate or Extra Records, but I think deals like this are great for producers who don't have the finances to drop thousands of dollars on plugins. Now, to sum up the rest of the plugins, I've got the BX Control, which is converting everything under 250Hz into mono and enhancing the stereo width by 25%. The two PSP Oldtimer plugins here are doing exactly the same job, both compressing, one the mids and one the sides. The L2 on the end here is my limiter of choice, leaving 0.2 dB of headroom for any intersample peaks. This next plugin is pretty cool actually. It's a free plugin from SM Exoscope, which allows you to view the track's waveform in real time. Now this can be super useful when you're applying limiting and compression effects, as you actually get a visual readout of what it's doing to the sound. Again, I'll link this up in the description for you guys. Make sure you check out the description too, because now there's going to be 3 different plugins in there that are all available for a free download. That's it for this one guys, I hope you enjoyed it. Remember to like and subscribe to make sure you never miss a tutorial. Also, share it with any of your friends who'd also find it useful, especially if they're a fan of Knxwledge. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next week. I'm out. Peace.